Noel Andrews, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Hey, thanks, John. Great to be here.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from London. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about remote work and how business owners can hire quality remote team members. One of the really nice things about remote work is that the geographical barriers to hiring have largely broken down. And we've experienced this more and more over the course of the pandemic. We realize we can hire great people from anywhere in the world as long as they have a reliable internet connection, they have the necessary hardware, and then, as long as time zones aren't too much of an issue in relation to delivery of products and services. But it's a great equalizer to be able to hire people from anywhere. It's great for employees who want the flexibility, who don't want to be restricted to a geographical location or have to move every time they change jobs. It's good for companies. So this is what we're going to be unpacking, but also more specifically about how, because there's a gazillion people out there who are looking for remote jobs. How do you identify like the best ones, the ones that are actually going to work out for your team? So that's what we'll be exploring. As we get started, I wanted to share Noel's bio with everybody. After spending 15 years recruiting and leading teams within large corporate technology functions, Noel Andrews bought PHRi to help bring the wonders of Eastern European remote workers to business owners all over the world. PHRi has been helping business owners get access to Eastern European remote workers since 2015, and over 500 businesses have hired successfully, many of them returning again and again as they build their teams with great hires from PHRi. Noel, anything else you would like to share about your personal background, your own kind of trajectory, career movement before we launch on into the broader conversation for today?
Yeah, I just think one of the realizations I had probably about 8-9 years ago now, it was after a day spent interviewing candidates for some corporate tech jobs. And it was that just crushing realization that hiring is really hard. And the bad news is it doesn't actually get any easier, but there's lots more kind of opportunities and places that we can look. And so I've kind of made it a little bit of a mission, and like my real focus is just trying to make it easier and help people get great jobs, and help business owners kind of grow and scale and kind of manage some of these challenges against something that is very, very hard, and yet is the most important thing for any manager, any exec, any business owner, is to find and hire and keep the best possible talent we can.
Yeah, and I think that's always a challenge, whether we're talking about face-to-face, in-person office, hybrid work, fully remote work. It's hard to assess and just really know who's going to work out for your organization. And honestly, a lot of times it just feels like a complete crapshoot. Like, someone looks really great on paper, they might even interview well, and then they get into the job and there's just interpersonal issues with other team members, or, they really get at selling themselves in an interview or on the resume, but they really aren't that great. So those types of issues are hard enough when you're together in person, but you add in the layer of remote work when you may not ever actually be in the same room with the person to have that kind of that interpersonal assessment. Why don't you walk us through, first of all, what some of the distinct benefits you see of the Eastern European remote worker labor force that's existed, and then how do we actually start to break down going through the hiring process when we're not physically co-located with individuals?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of the big benefits of Eastern Europe is that there's a real, almost like sweet spot and combination of really, really kind of hard work ethic culturally, combined with like really great education, especially around kind of technical kind of aspects like software development, graphic design, things like that. So very, very strong education system. Great English that is taught from a very, very early age, and it's very, very common for people to have 1 degree or even 2 degrees in various subjects, all kind of a lot of it learnt in English. A very kind of what's the right word? Almost just a very strong cultural alignment with US, UK, Australia, with kind of Western world. So there are many regions of the world, and you can hire anywhere in the world these days. But there are some areas of the world that have certain kind of cultural differences that just make it slightly harder. Whether that's communication style, whether it's willingness to be very direct in kind of like feedback or challenging a manager, and so we find kind of very like real kind of great compatibility between kind of Eastern Europe and kind of the Western world, and kind of real good cultural alignment. And one of the kind of the icing on the cake almost is that there's a generally a considerably lower cost of living that then translates into, really fair wages, but that's still really great value for kind of US or UK or kind of Western businesses hiring. So, it's not at all about, any element of like exploitation or anything like that. But, if someone, it's a bit like the difference of someone living in a tertiary city in the US versus living and trying to buy a property and buying real estate in San Francisco, right? The costs are different, and therefore often the salaries are. And then that's just more pronounced when we look at some of the regions of Eastern Europe that we focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Cost of living is just remarkably different. And again, like if you just look in the US, we see huge differences all throughout the country. Certainly that's the case in Europe. I've spent a decent amount of time in Eastern Europe, living in Minsk for a time, and I visit Warsaw and parts of Poland yearly. And it's a fabulous place. I love being there. I love visiting with the people, like you said, very hardworking, particularly in the tech sector. I think they're really on the cutting edge with really great labor force. So if you're looking for good tech talent, they got a lot of it there and hungry for, for work. So I think all of that's fantastic. And like you said, sometimes there's the wage kind of leverage that you can have that can be a win-win for them and for the company. So for all those reasons, I think Eastern Europe really can be a great place to tap into when we're talking about labor force complexities and high demand for workers right now. All right, so let's talk more about how we go about the process of hiring people when they are really fully 100% remote. How do you actually assess for that, and how do we manage that over time so that we give people the best opportunity to succeed once they're even selected for the business?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are just the same as when you're hiring in person, and then there's a couple of things that are a bit different. The number one thing where I see people making mistake with hiring in general, regardless of whether it's in person or remote, is just jumping in a bit too quick. And so the most important thing for me is right at the very start, really be thinking about like, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? And not just need right now, because oftentimes when we come to hire, it's like a little bit last minute. Ideally, we would have hired a few months ago. It's all a bit of a panic. And so it's trying to think forward 6 and 12 months and going, okay, what do I need them to be able to do and kind of grow into, and having that kind of slight kind of forward view. So a little bit of time up front is super, super key, because then you can make the right decisions on, right, well, are there any geographic constraints? Are there any time zone constraints to the work they need to do and the people they need to be interacting with? Are there any languages? Are there particular languages they need to speak? And so thinking about those very specific requirements, because that will then kind of help guide you to where you should potentially be looking, because you want to be looking for people where there is a good volume of potentially matching candidates. So that's kind of the same regardless of remote, but it's just it's almost more important with remote, because you have a choice of where you go to look for talent and for candidates. So think about that up front. Then as you go through the process, I think it's important to be a little bit kind of extra, add a bit of extra intent into the mix when it comes to putting people at ease, having conversations that you might otherwise have. If you meet someone in reception and you walk them to the interview room, right, you're having a little bit of chit chat, right? You're having that small talk, you're putting them at ease. Maybe they're asking some questions about what it's like to work there. That in a Zoom meeting, it's very easy to just be straight into things, and we lose the kind of the niceties and top and tail of the session. So a little bit of kind of extra intent there, making sure you're taking time to kind of get to know them as a person, because actually, we can test, and I'll cover that in a second, we can test for their actual smarts, we can test their ability to do the job and how they'll do it. But we kind of want them to be the right kind of person that we're going to get on with well enough, that's going to kind of fit into the team, but bring something else a little bit different too. So spending a little bit of time around that. I'm a big fan of getting candidates to actually meet the team. So as part of the recruitment process, just have a kind of a Zoom call where they're going to meet 2 or 3 of the team they're going to be working with, or even just one member of the team, just to have that little kind of chat, allow them to ask open questions. I think that's really key. And then the other thing that, really big companies and tech companies, especially like Google and Facebook, do testing really, really well. And you'll have a 7-stage recruitment process, which for me that's a little bit long, to say the least. But I think that there are certain companies that test really well, and then a lot of businesses we'll look at the CV, we'll look at application form, we'll do an interview, and then we'll cross our fingers and hope. And actually, a short test assignment just with some like scenarios and just very simple tasks that are basically what they'll be doing in the job that might just take, 1 to 2 hours, can be absolutely illuminating about how someone actually, kind of tackles the kind of work you want them to do. And so I encourage, and for every role that we hiring for and helping our clients for, it's an essential part of the role for us, whether it's a graphic designer, a writer, a software developer. And actually, not only do you see how they work, but you also see how they communicate and how they, submit the test and what questions they ask. And it also then gives you something to really dig into and have a good conversation about in the interview. So that is the single thing for me. And, people can use that in an in-person role as well. But that testing stage is where you really see how they're actually going to do the job, and then can give you just a lot of kind of confidence and kind of good feeling about, what sometimes is a bit of a subjective interview that's a bit tricky to be, quite concrete about, are they right or not?
Yeah, and interviewing always is tough, right? There's lots of research on employee selection, and interviewing is the most common approach, and it is the least predictive of how successful someone's going to be. So like you said, when we can have other forms of testing involved, that's really going to help. I think, especially if you're not going to be able to connect together in person during the interview process. I love the idea of involving the team at least at some point in the interviewing process, just so they can meet them and gauge kind of the interpersonal dynamics with team members, have a chance to ask questions. It's good for both sides, honestly, to know fit. When I'm looking to work with an organization, either as an employee or doing consulting work, I'm as interested in fit as they are. I want to see if it makes sense for me to be part of, working with that organization as much as they're asking the same questions of me. So I think that's good. I'm a big fan of just openness, transparency, and clarity around job expectations, and like what a realistic job preview, like you can actually know what it's going to be like to work in that role in that organization to the extent possible. It's better for the applicant, it's better for the eventual hire, certainly better for the organization, because then you're going to have a better sense of really how they're going to do in the job. And of course, depending on the type of work, you can have different types of tests and work samples and things like that. And I guess the question remains, though, because I know this is something you believe in, I think it's pretty darn clear in the research that that's important, yet so many organizations still rely so heavily on the interviewing without doing a lot of those other components. And even during the pandemic and with remote and hybrid workers. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Like, why do you think that persists so much? Why the bias towards interviewing?
I think, so there's a couple of things for me. One is that, if you're anything like me and, what it was like when I was in my corporate role, we're all really busy, right? We're trying to deliver the business. We're trying to manage the team we've got. When someone leaves and then we've got to replace them, it's always like, something else on my plate, right? It's something else we've got to squeeze into our day, and we've got pressures coming from everywhere. And so therefore we kind of this is an area where we often just do what we've always done. And as much as I hate that phrase, I'm really, really anti it, but we only know what we know. And unless you've been very fortunate to have had some, either had the time and the inclination to really invest in learning and reading books like Top Grading or, the Who method, for instance, you potentially don't know that there's another way, because generally, things are just done a particular way. So that's a big thing for me. People are busy. It's not their core competency, in the same way that candidates aren't taught how to interview, which is why most people don't interview well. Interviewers and managers in kind of businesses, and CEOs and owners, we're not taught how to interview either. And I think life and recruitment would be dramatically better if people had a better awareness of actually how to conduct an effective interview. And so I think it's just this kind of combination of, change is slow to come. We're humans. And so actually we kind of thrive on human connection, and we want to get to know the person that we're going to be working with. And on one hand, the most important thing is that they can do the job. But we often take that for a given because we've read their CV and, it gives a vague inclination that they can do the job. Then the next thing we want to know is that we can actually get on with them. Because actually, if we can teach skills, right, you almost exclusively cannot change someone's character. And so then from a human perspective, it's way more important that I feel I can get on with someone than kind of like putting all of the effort into, can they do the skills? And that's just, it's almost like human bias for me. And that's where, kind of a lot of what we do is helping people and helping our clients by, doing a lot of that pre-filtering, a lot of that work to have ruled, made sure that they are the right candidates in the first place, and would, remove the ones that aren't right, to allow people to spend time on the softer side of things. And as you said, it's a two-way process. And for anyone that's in any doubt, a few years ago, it might have been possible to put your job out there and get a flood of amazing candidates that were super thrilled to come and work for your business. That is not the case right now, right? It is, the best candidates are generally not hanging out on job boards. They want to interview you as much as you want to interview them. And so having that two-way dialogue is super important, not only because that's what they want, but also because we want the candidate to really want to come and work for us, right? We want them to be really invested, because what we don't want is, there's a real trend right now, especially in the US and the UK, for people starting a job and then maybe going, oh, no, it's not quite right. It's not quite perfect. I've been offered a few more $1,000s or pounds over here. I'm going to jump. And which is very different from not that many years ago. And that's a real difference we see with Eastern Europe. So people from Eastern Europe, generally, stereotypically, but it is generally true, are looking for stability, and they're looking to commit and kind of build that career that is a little bit less commonplace right now in the US and the UK, which is, if you're a small business owner or a medium-sized business owner, or well, any size business, it's immensely frustrating. You think you found the right person, they start, and then it doesn't work out, and then they leave, and you're like, oh, and you're kind of back to square one again. So as much as it can be painful to spend these extra minutes, these extra hours during the recruitment process, actually the time and the money that it saves is, typically it's an amazing return on it, because it's so painful and time consuming and expensive to hire.
Yeah, the long-term orientation when it comes to hiring is so important. You mentioned that. I mean, you started with that at the very beginning of the conversation. You said, take your time, like, don't rush into things. We're so anxious. We have this hole that we want to fill, and we're feeling pressure and burden because we're trying to make up for the loss of a person, an important member of the team, that it can be really easy to just say, oh, they have the skills. Oh, they check the boxes. Let's pull them in. Maybe it'll work out. Maybe you'll get lucky, but you're probably bound to have some frustration. So don't be too quick to rush in. Take the time up front, have a long-term orientation, which means you can value the investment up front, knowing that you'll have the long-term gains from it. Yeah. And if I do the upfront investment in employment testing and realistic job previews and work samples and those sorts of things, so I have a much better sense of who I'm dealing with in the applicant pool, that definitely helps you screen people out earlier, so you don't waste as much time in interviews. And then those interviews are spent doing more meaningful things to actually help how they're going to fit in with the group. And like you said, not only fit, but also provide that unique diversity element to bring different perspectives to help round out the team better. That's just so important. And if we can't get past the urgency of filling a spot, then we're just going to have a revolving door and be churning through people constantly. And it's just going to be endlessly frustrating.
Yeah. And two kind of really actionable kind of tips that I can give around this. So one is, I give people a lot of advice. If you feel like you're in a rush to hire, the first thing I would do is, how can you buy yourself time? Because if you rush the hiring process, it's almost certainly, right? This isn't even as good odds as if you go to Vegas and start playing the tables, right? It's not as good odds, and the house always wins. So, how can you buy yourself time, right? How could you get an interim or a contractor in for a short while to just give you that time, so you don't need to rush the process? So, think of ways. How could you buy yourself time is the first thing I always think about. And then when it comes to that, you're right. It's a hiring funnel is like a sales funnel, right? You want to bring as many people in the front end as possible, filter them down rapidly and with as minimal effort from you as possible, to then get down to, the one or the two that are right. And the big thing that we do that we find really, really effective is we put a lot of effort into crafting the job advert and the job description, a huge amount of effort. We include social proof from our employees about, what it's like to work at the company. We include, setting really clear expectations about if you'd worked with us over the past month, this is what you'd be working on. If your first few weeks in the role, this is what it's going to look like. So we really paint a clear picture. In the application form, we will then have, the kind of normal kind of application forms. We want to understand what the situation is, why they're leaving, why do they like the idea of this job. But we will include a couple of, I'm going to say technical questions, but role-specific questions that we can look at very quickly and have a really good idea of if they have the knowledge, the skills, the attributes we need to take them forwards. So when we're looking at an application form, and if it's a developer, we might ask them a very technical question that there's basically just one or two answers they could give. If it's a content writer, or if it's a social media person, it's a good example. You might say, hey, just give us an example of a post that you might write on Facebook to our audience on a Monday morning. So we're looking for a little bit of creativity. We're looking for really strong English. And we're looking to see that they've actually done 5 or 10 minutes research about our page and our social following. But it means that we skip straight to those questions and we can just look and very, very rapidly filter people out. So it's making this process easier for you, because the ones that are good and are right will rise to the top. Then you can review the rest of their application. So, little things like that are things that people can do to just help what is a painful process, make it a little bit less painful.
Yeah. Great advice, great tips. Noel, it's been a pleasure. I note the time. I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute. But before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
So yeah, if people want to get in touch, check out jobrack.eu. There's a wealth of content and information there. I'm always happy to chat to people. So if anyone's interested in kind of hiring remotely or hiring from Eastern Europe, always happy to jump on a call and kind of chat through kind of possibilities there. And then I think final thought is that there is just a huge amount of opportunity now to us all in kind of hiring remotely, whether you hire remotely but still within 50 miles of where you live and where your office is, or whether you hire thousands and thousands of miles away. I think it's all available, and there are just amazing people can be found everywhere. And it's just finding the ones that are right for you and can really kind of power your business forward.
I love it. Thank you, Noel. It's been a pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Noel and his team at JobRack can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.